putting FISA reauthorization into the national defense bill without reforms. This raising constitutional concerns. We sat down with Florida Congressman Cory Mills, also an Army veteran. He'll tell us why he voted against the NDAA and what he wants his colleagues and Americans to know about China. Congressman Cory Mills, thank you so much for taking a moment for us.
Thanks for having me.
Congressman, I want to get your thoughts. The NDAA passed, through the House. Are you happy with the current status of that bill?
Well, no, I think my vote would actually speak to the fact that I'm not happy. So I'm one of 73 Republicans who actually voted against the NDAA. And I want to make it clear, as a United States Army combat veteran myself, my actual focus and the priorities are to strengthen our military. But it's also to get rid of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and get back to increased lethality, readiness, and being properly equipped. These are the things that should be our priorities. Not putting things in there, or in other cases, what they're trying to say is, well, we didn't put it in, yes, but you didn't also take it out when it comes to things like travel abortion, when it comes to things like federal funding for transgender affirmation surgeries. But the big poison pill for me, we used to always complain in the Republican Party about the Democrats under Nancy Pelosi putting these poison pills where it's kind of a danged if you do, danged if you don't type of situation. Well, we just did that with Section 702 with a reauthorization of FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that legitimately has been confirmed to have been weaponized and abused over 287,000 times by the deep state FBI. And now without reforms, without any type of removal, repercussions, or penalties for those who are violating it, we're allowing this to go back in to violate Americans' Fourth Amendment rights. I mean, think about the hypocrisy of this for a moment. Our military, who the National Defense Authorization Act is supposed to be protecting and strengthening so that they can protect our privacy, freedoms, and rights, we then put the reauthorization of 702 that violates the privacy, freedoms, and rights. I mean, you can't make this up.
Tell us about FISA, exactly what it does.
Now, FISA's original intention was to try and ensure that we had a foreign intelligence surveillance capability that would enable us to stop terroristic activities prior to them occurring. And I think everyone can agree that that's something that we want. The issue, though, is that within FISA, and there's multiple sections, the one that I'm keying off on primarily is Section 702. Of Section 702, you have also Article 1 of that would even enable some of the actual spying or some of the surveillance to be utilized against Americans here on our home soil. So that's that Fourth Amendment violation that I'm talking about, not to mention they can't define what the actual degrees of separation is necessary in order to not trigger FISA. This is the thing, by the way, that people like Edward Snowden and Kash Patel and all the others have been warning all of us about, essentially, even Rick Grinnell, our former, DNI. And so for me, the idea is that if you want to have an intelligence surveillance program to help prevent terroristic activities, I'm all for it. But make sure that that's not being abused and utilized against, one, things like Crossfire Hurricane, which we're all familiar with, that was utilized against the Trump administration, was used against General Michael Flynn. Like the fact that it's been used against 9 or 10 other United States congressional members. So there has to be criteria and things that are set in there that can prevent this moving forward in the future. And authorizing or reauthorizing bad policy.
So what do you say to the argument that if we don't have it in place, then we'll be less secure? And what is the solution?
Well, I disagree with that assertion to begin with. There's other sections within the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act that also does very similar things. And so it's more of almost like a habeas corpus type of coverage as they would utilize the AUMFs for, right? So I think that there is a good thing that can come out of this. I think the problem, however, is that there must be necessary reforms. And unfortunately, everyone who has been in politics for more than a couple terms are terrified to put in reforms because they're technically saying in their minds that one of the bills that I may have voted yes to pass is actually not as good as what I thought it was. And in reality, what they should be saying is that with evolving times, our policies and legislation should also be evolving to ensure that it's more relevant today than it was yesterday.
Congressman, I want to ask you about the aid packages to Ukraine and Israel. Do you believe that they should be separated? And when it comes to Ukraine, I mean, it's fundamentally different. What should the objective be there? What would you like to see?
Well, absolutely, it needs to be separated. Those are not the same thing. When you talk about Ukraine, we've handled that wrong from the very beginning. Whenever, in 2014, we had Russia coming into Donetsk or coming into Luhansk, we should have actually been utilizing, whether it has teeth on it or not, for any type of penalties, the '94 Budapest Memorandum. which was a nuclear non-proliferation agreement that was signed by Ukraine, the Federation of Russia, UK, Northern Ireland, and the United States. We could have levied that to ensure that we got international support. But the problem is that you have people who have been in office for 20 and 30 and even 40 years who still think that we need to treat everything like the 1980s Cold War, that we have to try and be interventionists in the world's police, and that everything must be in kinetic warfare, not understanding the economic resource cyber-based warfare that we're now currently in. And so Ukraine has been handled poorly from the very beginning. It was never a war that I thought Ukraine could win. It was one that I thought that we should be pushing more of the type of a peace treaty and agreement, utilizing international pressures, utilizing additional sanctions, looking at diplomatic isolation. But we continue to try and fund this at the tune of $114 billion when the U.S. is actually facing economic collapse with our own overspending at $34 trillion. You know, when you talk about Israel, on the other hand, what we did differently is that instead of taking new taxpayer money and allocating that over for increased spending, what we actually did was we said, hey, you know what? Joe Biden and the weaponized IRS that's been coming after conservatives, they're trying to get another 87,000 IRS agents in there. We're going to reallocate that funding away from that, and we're going to take 14.3 from the IRS, and we're going to give it over to Israel to be able to fight an actual terrorist organization, Hamas, who is an actual threat. And knowing that if you're a constitutionalist, we know that our Constitution is based on our Judeo-Christian beliefs. We know that it's about protection of inalienable rights. We know that Israel is one of our longest standing partners within the Middle East that we need to be able to stand strong with. And so those are two completely separate issues. I will tell you ahead of time, I will not vote for a single penny to go to Ukraine. We've already spent $114 billion. We have no actual mission strategy whatsoever, no understanding of what our U.S. national interests are. Let's focus on the things that matter, like protecting Israel's right to be able to defend itself, and also securing our border. The greatest threat that we have in America right now, the fentanyl overdoses, the increase in cartels, the sex and human child sex trafficking that's going on in this nation. Let's focus on the securing of our own borders so we don't have our October 7th like Israel had, or another 9/11 at home.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, he's heading up the committee, select committee on the Chinese Communist Party. There's a lot of things coming out of that select committee, one of which most recently was China's transnational repression on U.S. soil. How concerned are you about the CCP's growing influence in our country?
Well, I think that we have to acknowledge two things. Economics are our greatest outside of our border domestic issue. And China, they're our greatest existential threat from an international perspective. The China, Russia, Iran, North Korea geopolitical alignment is something that every American needs to be concerned with. Their advancement of BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa geopolitical alignment that's expanding out. We need to think about the Belt and Road Initiative expansions, which looked at the Eurasian expansion, the control of Africa and Oceania to cut off Western Hemisphere supply chain. Their goal with Russia and China, why they modified their constitution, isn't just their tyrannical, authoritarian, and dictatorship style ruling. It's about eliminating the US dollar as the global currency. That's why they utilize their marriage of convenience with Russia for the Chavez of Venezuela, with Petro in Colombia, the economic coercion that they've thrown into Honduras and Panama to control the tariffs, taxation, and passage through the Panama Canal. The idea that they're now ingratiating themselves more in the Western Hemisphere, and they're actually responsible for all the chemical precursors and the things that are being printed, the fentanyl that's coming across our borders. They are on a multi-pronged front. They're at an economic resource cyber-based warfare against America. And so we have to understand that we need to be looking at elimination of double taxation on Taiwan. We need to be looking at the ideas of decoupling away from adversarial nations, and they're not a competitor, they're an adversary. So getting away from China, taking control of our supply chain, taking control of our actual ability in the industrial base, stopping the idea of continuing to export to countries that are looking to destroy us. And the problem is that when you've got people like Joe Biden who are so corrupt and so inept and feckless, who are so weak on China, weakness invites aggression. And that's why you're seeing this emboldened approach by China to advance their problems in their support of Iran, who is backing Hamas, their support of Russia, who is invading Ukraine. They want to drag us into these endless wars because they know economically it is a really disadvantage for the American people, but also it's great for them because we buy a lot of our actual raw material goods. They control 15 of 16 rare earth mineral mines. So we need to wake up and understand China is not a competitor, they're not an ally, they're an adversary, and we need to be decoupling away.
Congressman Cory Mills, thank you so much. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.